Hello and welcome to Ramblings of a 42-Year-Old Man. Chris Smith here with you. We're going to take a break from the 101 Horror Books to Read Before Your Murder series that I've been kind of focusing on recently. We're going to talk about some books based from the recommendations from the Talking Scared podcast. Now, I've talked about this podcast a few times on each of the past couple episodes because a lot of these this reading journey that I'm on right now, not only with Sadie's book, but also with Neil McRobert's podcast, this Talking Scared podcast, has kind of gotten me on this kick where I've gotten all these great recommendations for books, and I wanted to kind of dive into them. So we've done a lot of episodes based on book recommendations that I've gotten from Sadie Hartman and the 101 Books to Read Before You're Murdered. But now we're going to talk about just about 5 or so that I've gotten from listening to the Talking Scared podcast. We're going to kind of go through some of the ones that I've caught from listening to him. There's a couple nonfiction ones. There's some obviously fiction ones, all with a horror focus, which of course is right up my alley. So stay tuned and we will talk about some books from Talking Scared. All right, so we are going to begin with a book that Neil has as episode 4 of his podcast. And the reason why I'm starting at 4 is because episode 1 was Paul Tremblay's The Cabinet at the End of the World, which I had read prior to listening to the podcast. Book 2 was The Fisherman by John Langdon. Also, I had read before listening to the podcast. Same thing with number 3, which was Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and she had the book of Mexican Gothic, which I had read prior to the podcast. But this one I read specifically because I heard Neil and Joe Kaplan, the author of this book, talking about it. So that is It Will Just Be Us. All of these books I'm going to talk about, except for I think one of them, came out about 2020 because that's when these episodes have been out. I've been having to catch up on some episodes because he started this podcast around the pandemic time. And so this one was 2020 release. Again, author is Joe Kaplan. The book is It Will Just Be Us, and it's episode 4 in the Talking Scared podcast where he talks to Joe Kaplan about this book. And I'll just give a little bit of background on the book itself. I'm going to stay out of spoiler territory on any of this stuff. I don't really like spoiling, but I'll just say that this one is a Gothic horror novel. It's about 2 sisters and their mother. They're in this house, and it's kind of described as a haunted house that doesn't sleep. And the one thing I will say that really sets us apart is this haunting is a very different kind of haunting, than what you might be going in thinking of, your typical ghost or something. The ghosts in this are not typical at all. The reason why they're there is not typical at all. And the fallout from what it is that they want or that they do is not typical at all. I enjoyed this one quite a bit. This is actually one of my favorite ones that I've kind of gotten the recommendation from the Talking Scared podcast on. And I really, really enjoy this. It's kind of my first recommendation listened to from the podcast, and I thought this is gonna be a great thing, and it has been. It's been a lot of fun so far, and it started right here with this book. Next one I'm going to talk about is The Devil and the Dark Water. This is by Stuart Turton, and this also was released in 2020. This is episode 6 of Neil's show, and the reason why I skipped episode 5 is episode 5 was Jeremy Robert Johnson's The Loop, which we talked about on a episode a couple of weeks ago because that was also in Sadie Hartman's book, The 101 Horror Books to Read Before You're Murdered. And I don't want to double up on these. We already talked about that one. But so episode 6, this was The Devil in the Dark Water. This one is a great, great, great mix of high seas, murder mystery, detective series. Think a Holmes-Watson kind of mix. With this kind of possible demon mixed into the fray. And so it's a lot of fun. It mostly takes place on a, what would you call it, not passenger liner, but on an old style ship. Actually, I watched the last voyage of the Demeter not too long before reading this book, and it gave me a lot of those same kind of vibes. But we are following a Holmes-like character who actually is imprisoned for most of the story, and his Watson kind of sidekick really is the one running the investigation. He's the character I like the most. I really, really enjoy the Holmes character is fun, but the Watson-like character is really great. And, you kind of come into it thinking, oh, he's just kind of the brute, the help, the backing to this, the Holmes-like character. But man, he really does come into his own throughout the book. And it was a lot of fun to read. I like this one a lot. Again, murder on the high seas. You kind of got a detective murder mystery angle in there, which I am an Agatha Christie fanatic, so I love that kind of stuff. More than Holmes. I've always been at more Poirot than Holmes, but I did enjoy that dynamic that they had going here, and I love the fact that the Watson character is the one who's kind of taking it on. And then kind of, I don't want to say in the background, but you hear I'm doing all this talking, we barely even touched on the fact that there might be a demon on this ship. But yeah, it gets into that, and it goes some pretty cool places. Very twisty, very turny, and I like this one a lot. This was definitely a home run for me. Of all the ones I'm going to talk about today, I think this one was my favorite of the bunch. So again, that is The Devil in the Dark Water, Stuart Turton. I hope I'm saying that right. Apologize if I'm not. And yeah, that one was a lot of fun, and I hope you give that one a shot. Okay, and the next one we're going to talk about is The Haunting of Alma Fielding. This is by Kat Summerscale, and this was also released in 2020. This was on episode 7 of the Talking Scared podcast. So, we went up 6, 7. I think we're staying pretty much right along here, so that's good. Now, this one is a bit of a change-up. So, everything we've kind of read so far has been horror fiction. This is very much almost like a dramatization, sort of a true story. It's kind of true crime, nonfiction narrative, but it's kind of almost presented like a story. I like the way it's written. Like, even though it is a true crime retelling of a true story, the narrative almost feels like you're reading a true like a fiction book. But this is a dramatization of a true story of a young woman back in the 1930s who claimed to be that she was the center of a whole lot of paranormal activity. And then it's also about the ghost hunter who was sent to either validate her claims or debunk her claims and move forward from there. And it goes to very interesting places. I'm sure that the story of Alma Fielding is out there for anybody to find, but I really like where Kat Summerscale kind of, not only the haunting itself, so maybe, if the haunting really isn't paranormal, maybe these other reasons why these things happen are kind of looked at and brought forth, and is pretty interesting to hear all these different things that could maybe make you think you were being haunted, or maybe she really was. It definitely leaves it open to interpretation with that, but I do like how it kind of uncovers some other alternative possibilities for why things are happening. So again, that's The Haunting of Alma Fielding by Kat Summerscale. If anybody is like a true crime fan or likes any of those, the exorcism of this person or the possession of this person kind of shows, this would be kind of up your alley. So maybe you would enjoy that one. All right, moving right along, sticking right with episode 8 of the Talking Scared podcast, we're going to talk about Plain Bad Heroines, which is by Emily Danforth, another 2020 release. And this one follows kind of twin narrative stories. So we follow, one is a couple of young girls are killed at a boarding school for young women back in, I think it's like 1902, so really early 1900s. And then there's a present day story where they're trying to film a horror movie version of this story as well. And, a lot of great characters in this, almost practically entirely female cast characters. There's some guys in there here and there, but it really is centered on these female characters, not only in the current narrative where there's a couple of actresses and the writer of this film that's being made, really follows the 3 of them as a group, but also the 2 girls, and then the kind of headmistress and some of the other women that run the school in the past are really followed closely as well. And those 2 narratives are kind of intertwined throughout. You kind of go back and forth throughout it, and really opens up some pretty interesting things. I found it more of a cool character study than anything else. I really did enjoy all of the characters and all their interactions and stuff. And then, some of the reveals and stuff later in the book are pretty cool. But the characters themselves are really the selling point of this one. So that is Plain Bad Heroines by Emily Danforth. All right, finally, we'll do one more, and this is episode 10 of Neil's Talking Scared podcast, and this is Ghostland by Colin Dickey. Reason we skipped from 8 to 10 is because episode 9 was The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, and we talked about that book already, and I talked a lot about how much I love T. Kingfisher stuff. But Ghostland is another nonfiction one. Now, this one came out in 2016, so this is the only one that was in 2020. And this one is a road trip through some of the U.S.'s most famous haunted places, and what it really digs into, not necessarily just telling you what these hauntings are, what has been kind of reported to have happened in these places, but it really digs into some of the past things that happen in these places that may have led to these haunted stories being told. It gets into some really dark and deep places in the U.S. history, and so that was pretty cool. You go in and it's not just like, oh, this place is so haunted, they're so scary. It's like it digs into where these stories are coming from. It still leaves it up to you whether you think hauntings are true or not, but it does kind of uncover some of the dark past that may have informed some of these sightings, as you may have. So, again, that's Ghostland by Colin Dickey. That one was a lot of fun as well. Of the 2 nonfiction ones, that might be the more fun one, but if you are more of a true crime fan, then the Alma Fielding one, the Kat Summerscale written one, might be more your jam. But those both are a lot of fun. I'm typically more of a horror fiction guy, but I really did enjoy running down these couple of nonfiction lanes. So that's it. That's what we're going to talk about today. There's I think 5 books, but as I'm listening through, I've listened to a whole lot of other episodes of his show of books that I've already read, or like I mentioned before, a lot of the books that he talks to authors intertwines with Sadie Hartman's book as well. So we've talked about some of those already too. Like Joe Lansdale had a book in there. T. Kingfisher I already talked about that I've covered. And there's a lot more of those as well. I've probably listened to maybe about half of his, but I'm kind of holding off because I want to start reading some of these books before I listen to these author interviews. I think it's kind of fun that way. So that is the Talking Scared podcast. Look it up. It's on any of your podcast feeds, where you'd find it. I do it right on my Apple Podcast app. But give it a listen. Neil is very well informed, and his questions are always really good, and the authors always seem to be having a good time doing it. So give it a shot. All right, that's it for us. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening as always, and we'll see you again soon. Bye now.